August 29, 1951, Western Belgium, near the town of Doornel. An old military truck stood abandoned along the edge of a narrow country road. Its canvas top had been shredded by shrapnel, and, though silent, the engine was still radiating warmth. The vehicle, a model from the American Army's supply line, had recently come under attack by a rare flyover from the Luftwaffe, a surprising appearance considering how seldom German aircraft now dared to enter Western airspace. A group of men from the 334th Infantry Division approached the wreck cautiously. Their unit insignias and dusty fatigues marked them as maintenance crew. Among them was a broad-shouldered sergeant named Marshal Briggs, who waved another man over. "Go fetch Ray Hollister," he called out. "This one's still warm." What they discovered over the next hour didn't just confirm their suspicions, it underscored a grim reality that had been growing clearer since the Allied landings. The Germans hadn't lost this war on the battlefield, they'd lost it on the factory floor, somewhere between Detroit and Chicago. The truck was massive by European standards, rated for a 2.5-ton payload. It dwarfed the familiar German Hauler 2000s they had in their motor pool. But even more surprising was how user-friendly it all appeared. The hood popped open easily, revealing a 6-cylinder engine with components labeled cleanly in plain English. There was no mystery to it. A toolbox mounted near the step-down was filled with standard-issue wrenches, pliers, and a pristine instruction manual printed on glossy, durable paper, complete with illustrations. Briggs chuckled, flipping through the manual. "Would you look at that? You wouldn't need to read a damn word. Just follow the pictures. Even a teenager from Kansas could put this thing back together." They'd encountered American trucks before, sure, but never bothered to dissect one so thoroughly. This was different. This one told a story. Stamped clearly on the frame was the General Motors logo, alongside markings that identified the vehicle as a 1950 CCKW 353, the long wheelbase version. The production tag showed it had rolled off the Pontiac, Michigan assembly line, one of over 100,000 built in just that single year. One plant, one model, more than Germany had managed to manufacture across all vehicle classes combined. The first inspection made one thing crystal clear. This American truck wasn't about elegance or cutting-edge performance. Its GMC 270 engine pushed out a modest 104 horsepower. Not exactly thrilling numbers on paper, certainly not by German engineering standards. But then again, raw power wasn't the point. All the bolts across the chassis, identical sizes. Every nut could be loosened using the same wrench. The spark plugs, arranged for easy reach. The oil filter could be popped out by hand. No specialized tools, no training manuals thicker than a Bible, just logic and accessibility. "This thing's made for idiots," muttered one of the younger mechanics. "Not idiots," Hollister corrected him, crouching beside the open hood. "It's made for an army of farm boys and factory men, folks with no mechanical background. That's the genius of it." He wasn't wrong. This machine wasn't engineered for complexity. It was engineered for function, for a conscript army that needed to keep moving, for young men from Ohio farms and Indiana mills turned into drivers and repairmen overnight. Every component was selected for how quickly it could be swapped or repaired. No rare alloys, no hard-to-source parts, no mysteries, just common-sense design at industrial scale. They explored the drivetrain. A simple transfer case allowed the driver to engage the front axle with a single lever, four-wheel drive at the flip of a wrist. By contrast, their own Hauler 2000s only offered rear power and routinely bogged down in the thick Belgian mud, requiring finesse and constant vigilance just to stay mobile. This American beast, on the other hand, could barrel through terrain that would leave their German rigs spinning helplessly. The suspension? Just a set of standard leaf springs. Crude, yes, but rugged, durable. Unlike the delicate torsion bar systems on their own vehicles, elegant designs to be sure, but practically useless in the field without a service bay and precision tools. If a spring on this GMC cracked, you could straighten it with a rock. But it was the numbers that really rattled them. Briggs pointed to the production stamp again. This one's from Pontiac, Plant Run. That's just one factory, and they made over 150,000 in 1950 alone. One of the younger men ran the math in his head, jaw tightening. If they've got a dozen plants doing this, how the hell do we keep up? He knew the answer. They couldn't. GMC, Ford, Dodge, International, Studebaker, Chevrolet, all churning out standardized trucks on shared blueprints, all with interchangeable parts, all pushing out steel giants on an assembly line scale the axis powers simply couldn't match. As dusk fell, a tall man joined the inspection crew. Captain Ernest Keller, their unit's logistics officer, had arrived. Before the war, he'd been a production supervisor at an Opel factory in Brandenburg. He knew manufacturing inside and out. He didn't say much at first, just looked, studied, touched the cold steel with calloused fingers. Finally, he said it. They didn't just outfight us, they outbuilt us. August 30th, 1951, just outside Dornell, Western Belgium. "We're looking at this the wrong way," said Captain Ernest Keller, arms folded as he stared down at the idling American truck they had been using for the past week. "This isn't just a vehicle, it's an entire production philosophy, one we simply cannot compete with." He gestured to the rugged vehicle, its olive-green chassis streaked with dirt and battle wear. "Take this frame, for example. Simple ladder-style construction, straight steel rails welded together. Any average steel workshop could fabricate this." He paused, eyes narrowing. "Now compare that to what we used to make at Opel, precision-molded frame rails that required special presses and custom tooling. Elegant, yes, but slow, limited." The rest of the squad listened silently. Keller was no ordinary officer. Before the war, he had worked in the automotive industry, and he saw what many of his comrades could not. The truck, marked as a GMC CCKW 353, may have lacked the sleek refinement of a German-built Opel Blitz, but it was designed to be built, not admired. The body panels were thick, flat stamped steel, crude by appearance, but fast and easy to produce in mass quantities. The flatbed was crafted from standard lumber, the sort any sawmill in the States could supply by the ton. The canvas cover, just ordinary fabric, not a single part bespoke or exotic. It was all standard, interchangeable, and abundant. "Everything on this truck," Keller continued, "was designed with industrial scale in mind, not perfection, efficiency." And the numbers backed up his analysis. In 1943, Keller remembered, Germany had barely managed to produce 27,000 Opel Blitz trucks. The Americans, on the other hand, they had built nearly 20 times that number, just of the GMC model, and that was only one truck type from one manufacturer. In fact, the numbers were worse than he had feared. By the time the war ended, American plants had cranked out over 562,000 of these GMC trucks alone. In contrast, Germany's total military truck production across all brands and models barely reached 100,000, and most of those were rear-wheel drive, lacking the off-road capability of the six-wheeled CCKW. For the next week, Keller's division used the captured GMC to haul supplies across muddy rural paths where their own vehicles had struggled and often failed. This truck, built half a world away, powered through it all, even when loaded far beyond its rated capacity. The sergeant in charge of logistics, Marshal Briggs, drove the GMC daily. He quickly grew attached to it. "This truck's not pretty, but she's reliable in ways our machines never were. And it's not because it's better built, it's because it was designed to take abuse. It's made for war, not parades." He hit the hood with the flat of his palm. The folks who built this knew it would be overloaded, neglected, and run into the ground, and they planned for that. That's the difference. That realization was the most unsettling of all. American engineers had not designed their vehicles in labs or ivory towers. They had built them for real war, for chaos, for mud, for inexperience, for the daily hell of combat. And because of that, their trucks were simple, resilient, and forgiving. On August 30th, 1951, the same day that Operation Iron Stream officially launched in the region, the 334th Infantry Division received orders to reposition farther east. While preparing for the move, the men witnessed something that left a lasting impression. A convoy passed along a parallel road. It was not a combat unit, it was a supply column. The German soldiers quietly counted the vehicles as they rolled by. Within 30 minutes, they stopped trying. The line stretched for miles, truck after truck after truck, endless olive-drab beasts moving in near-perfect synchronization. Mostly GMC CCKWs, identical, organized, efficient. "Where are their horses?" asked a young soldier, Johann Krieger, genuine confusion in his voice. Ray Hollister, the veteran mechanic, smirked. "Kid's never seen a fully motorized army before," he muttered to Briggs. And it was true. In the Wehrmacht, 80% of logistics still relied on horses. Their own division needed more than 5,000 horses just to keep their supply lines running. Horses that fed, watered, rested, and constant veterinary care. Horses that, on a good day, could travel 30 kilometers, less in winter, and many of them simply didn't survive the cold. The Americans had no horses. They had trucks. Thousands of trucks. Machines that didn't sleep, didn't eat, didn't freeze to death. Machines that could cover hundreds of kilometers per day, moving fuel, rations, and ammunition with unrelenting speed. That evening, Captain Keller sat down with a pencil and pad, scribbling calculations long after the others had turned in. If each American division operated around 2,000 trucks, and there were 40 divisions in Western Europe, that meant at least 80,000 vehicles in theater, just for combat support. That figure didn't even account for the thousands more in reserve units, supply corps, or maintenance battalions. One of the engineers voiced the obvious. How in the hell are they building this much hardware? No one had a clear answer. Was it their wealth, their workforce, their resources? Perhaps all of the above. But one thing was clear to every man who stood on that roadside, watching that endless convoy stretch into the fading light. They weren't just fighting the American army, they were fighting American industry. And that was a war they were never going to win. October 14, 1951, Dornell region, Western Belgium. American vehicle production had been built for mass output long before the first shots of the war were fired. Assembly line manufacturing was second nature to companies like Ford and General Motors. So when the war began, these giants of industry didn't need to reinvent their operations, they simply retooled. The same factories that once rolled out shiny Chevrolet sedans now churned out olive-drab GMC cargo trucks. Workers who had spent years assembling Oldsmobiles were now bolting together machines for the battlefield. The transition was smooth because the philosophy behind both civilian and military production was the same: standardization, interchangeability, and volume. In contrast, Germany had engineers, brilliant ones, but lacked the industrial foundation to bring their designs to scale. The Opel plant in Brandenburg, even at peak capacity, couldn't come close to matching a single American automotive complex, and America had dozens of them. By September, the 334th Infantry Division, still stationed in Western Belgium, had captured 3 more American vehicles, 2 more GMC trucks, and a Dodge WC-63. Their mechanics noticed something that seemed almost unbelievable. Parts were interchangeable. not just within GMC vehicles, but across different manufacturers. The carburetor from a GMC truck fit perfectly into the Dodge. Electrical systems shared common components. Even the tires matched in size and tread. To the astonished mechanics, it was a revelation. "They've standardized their entire fleet," explained Captain Ernest Keller. "One technical blueprint, multiple manufacturers. That means any mechanic can work on any truck. Any depot can stock the same parts. Their entire logistics web is unified." It was a dream the Germans had never achieved. The Wehrmacht operated vehicles from dozens of different manufacturers. Each one had its own unique parts, tools, and training needs. A mechanic trained to service an Opel Blitz might be useless when handed a Busing NAG or a Mercedes 4500. Spare parts warehouses were forced to carry components for hundreds of vehicle types. It was a logistical nightmare. On October 3, 1951, the 334th Infantry Division found itself immobilized not by enemy fire, but by a fuel shortage. Their trucks sat idle. The few horses that remained could forage, but their machines were helpless. Meanwhile, across the region, American convoys continued their operations without interruption. Fueled by a supply chain built on thousands of standardized GMC trucks, fuel reached forward positions like clockwork. Mechanics with nothing to repair spent their time analyzing the captured vehicles. It was during one of these long, quiet afternoons that Sergeant Marshall Briggs made a comment that struck everyone. He said, "We built our machines to be excellent." He tapped the hood of a nearby Opel. "They built theirs to be good enough in huge numbers, and that's what wins wars." Back in his tent, Ray Hollister finished compiling a detailed technical report on the GMC CCKW. It outlined everything: interchangeable components, foolproof maintenance procedures, a rugged design that sacrificed beauty for reliability. The report noted that while the Opel Blitz may have beaten the GMC in fuel efficiency and maneuverability, such advantages were rendered irrelevant by sheer numbers. For every Opel we build, they produce 5 or 6 trucks, and each one keeps rolling, no matter the conditions. The report's final conclusion was blunt. American vehicle production represents an industrial capability we simply cannot match. Their manufacturing philosophy prioritizes volume and uniformity, not individual perfection. In a prolonged war, that approach proves devastatingly effective. Similar reports began filtering into German high command from every front. Intelligence officers, grim-faced and sleepless, compiled production statistics from Allied sources. The figures were staggering. By late 1951, American manufacturers that produced over 2.4 million military trucks. Germany, Italy, and Japan combined couldn't approach that number. Then came the Ardennes campaign, Hitler's final gamble on the Western Front. The logistics of the offensive, ironically, depended heavily on seizing American fuel. Germany simply didn't have enough fuel of its own to sustain the operation. Soldiers were given orders, whenever possible, capture and use American trucks. German logistics were too fractured and underpowered to keep up. It was a cruel irony. The last great push of the German military depended entirely on capturing the very machines and fuel that symbolized their defeat. The 334th Infantry Division, operating under new command orders, was assigned to the offensive. They deployed with their remaining Opel Blitzes, supplemented by the captured GMCs and Dodges. These American trucks had quickly become the backbone of their operations. For a brief moment, it worked. The GMCs hauled supplies, moved troops, and kept the division advancing, until the push ground to a halt. And it wasn't American resistance that stopped them, though that resistance was fierce and unrelenting. It was logistics. Fuel ran dry. Spare parts became impossible to find.
Horses died by the hundreds in the cold, and the trucks, once again, sat still. But this time, the Germans weren't just outgunned. They were outbuilt.
March 21, 1952. The Rhineland, near the village of Altheim. Fuel convoys had stopped arriving. Tanks were abandoned on muddy roads, their crews forced to flee or dig in, waiting for orders that would never come. Infantry units, once motorized, were now reduced to pulling their equipment on wooden carts. Horses returned to the front lines, not as cavalry, but as lifelines. Across the front, the Americans kept moving. While German logistics unraveled in every direction, the U.S. supply chain continued to operate with mechanical precision. The famed Red Ball Express had officially ended back in November, but American logistics had only grown more sophisticated. Now supplies flowed in from Antwerp, Brussels, and Cherbourg, with trucks rolling across freshly repaired roads, their routes streamlined by combat engineers who restored France's shattered infrastructure in record time. By January of 1952, following the failed winter offensive in the Ardennes, the value of captured American vehicles skyrocketed. The GMC trucks seized by the 334th Infantry Division were still operational. In comparison, the German-built Opel Blitz trucks, exposed to the same relentless wear and unforgiving weather, were failing fast. The difference? It wasn't just maintenance. It was a matter of design philosophy. The GMCs had been engineered from the start to survive harsh conditions, overloading, and neglect. The Opels were crafted with German precision, but that precision demanded care, conditions that simply didn't exist on a battlefield. Where one truck was built to endure, the other was built to perform, until it couldn't. By March, the 334th Division was entrenched in defensive positions in the Rhineland, just as American forces crossed the Rhine in overwhelming numbers. The mechanics of the 334th could only watch as the American supply machine thundered past, unstoppable and unbroken. "They built an army powered by logistics," Captain Keller muttered, his voice a mix of awe and despair. "And they built logistics that cannot be stopped." Beside him, Ray Hollister nodded. "We built for short campaigns, strikes, retreats, mobility. We never imagined we'd be locked in years of fighting against a country that makes equipment faster than we can destroy it." On April 18, 1952, the 334th Infantry Division surrendered. Their war ended the same way much of it had been fought, aboard GMC trucks. American vehicles carried the captured soldiers to processing centers near Koblenz, where the Germans received yet another lesson in the scale and efficiency of their enemy's industry. In that holding area, hundreds of trucks lined massive motor pools. Young American soldiers moved between them with easy confidence, maintaining and refueling the fleet with a casual competence the Wehrmacht had rarely achieved. Tools were organized, spare parts plentiful, and manuals written so simply that even barely trained soldiers could execute complex fixes. One of the captured mechanics, a quiet man named Eric Voss, struck up a conversation with an American sergeant named Walt Hensley, a motorcycle dispatch rider with oil-stained sleeves and a cigarette dangling from his lips. "You one of the mechanics?" Hensley asked, eyeing Voss. "Yes," Voss replied, wary but honest. "Well, hell," the American grinned. "We could use some mechanics. You know your way around these?" He nodded toward the nearest GMC. "We've serviced a few," Voss admitted. "Good," Hensley said, "because the war is over for you, but these trucks still need fixin'. I can get you out of barbed wire and into the motor pool. Beats sittin' on a bunk all day." And just like that,
Voss and 2 other captured mechanics began working alongside American soldiers, maintaining the very trucks that had helped defeat their army. In the following weeks, they learned firsthand the American philosophy of field maintenance. "Everything's about speed," Hensley explained one afternoon. "Standard parts, fast fixes, and tools that fit everything. See this engine? 2 guys can pull it apart and rebuild it in 8 hours, using only what's in that toolbox right there." Voss nodded, studying the layout under the hood. "With our trucks, you'd need a factory." "Exactly," Hensley said. "You folks built machines for precision. We build for practicality." And it was true. In peacetime, perhaps the German approach produced better vehicles, but in war, the American strategy kept armies moving. "How many of these trucks did you make?" Voss asked. Hensley shrugged. "Just this model? Over 500,000. Add in the Dodges, Studebecks, Internationals, we're talking a few million." Voss blinked. "That many?" The American gave a tired smile. "It ain't the best gear that wins. It's the gear you can't stop coming." And it wasn't just about quantity. The American trucks were simple, durable, and mass-produced using civilian technology. Most of the engines and transmissions were commercial grade, barely modified for military use. They were reliable because they didn't try to be revolutionary. They just worked. That, more than anything else, was the lasting lesson for the German mechanics. America didn't just win with tanks, planes, and bullets. It won with a philosophy of production, designed from the beginning for scale, ruthlessly standardized, built for endurance, not elegance, supported by supply chains that could operate for years without slowing. They hadn't just been fighting a foreign army. They had been fighting American industry. And in that war, there had only ever been one outcome.
Late 1945, Frankfurt, U.S. occupation zone, Germany. Months passed. The captured mechanics from the 334th Infantry Division spent those months in Allied prisoner-of-war camps, many of them assigned to work in American motor pools. Day after day, they witnessed firsthand the overwhelming scale of American logistics. Convoys of hundreds of trucks moved constantly through the occupied zones, hauling everything from food to fuel to building supplies. The repair depots were like nothing the Germans had ever seen, stockpiled with more spare parts than a full German division could ever hope to acquire. Some damaged trucks were simply pulled aside and replaced altogether. It was faster to send a new one than to wait for repairs. By the end of 1945, as the repatriation process began, the German mechanics returned to a homeland they barely recognized. Cities lay in rubble, factories were skeletons. The war had left Germany in ashes. But everywhere they looked, American vehicles. GMC trucks carried construction materials through ruined streets. Jeeps escorted occupying patrols. Heavy-duty American equipment drove the earliest efforts to rebuild. One of those mechanics, now just a civilian named GPYL, found work at a service depot in Frankfurt. Ironically, it was his experience with American vehicles that got him the job. He trained a new generation of German apprentices, young men who had never known peace. And sometimes, during those quiet sessions in the workshop, he would pause and reflect on the strange, brutal lessons of the war. "Before the war," he said one afternoon, wiping his hands with a rag, "before we had believed in the superiority of German engineering, we thought quality would always beat quantity." He glanced out at the yard, where a line of GMC CCKW trucks sat ready for service. "We were wrong." The Americans understood modern warfare in a way the Germans had not. They built enough machines, and they built them in numbers that broke armies. They standardized everything without mercy. They designed vehicles for soldiers, not specialists. They didn't create the army they wanted. They built the army they needed, Millions of ordinary men equipped with trucks that were simple to drive and easy to fix. That was the genius. He topped one of the old CCKWs on the hood. These weren't engineering masterpieces, but there were hundreds of thousands of them. Same parts, same controls. Any soldier could drive one. Any mechanic could fix one. That, he realized, had been the true brilliance, not in the vehicles themselves, but in the system that created them. By 1947, under the Marshall Plan, aid was flooding into Germany, almost all of it carried by American trucks. And once again, it was German hands that kept those machines running. The mechanics had absorbed every lesson, learned every shortcut, memorized every bolt. And when German industry began to rise from the rubble, those lessons stuck. Manufacturers across the country, Mercedes-Benz, BMW, a resurrected Volkswagen, all began to adopt American production methods. They merged German precision with American mass production. They designed with an eye toward efficiency, interchangeability, and scalability. Many of the same mechanics who had once served the Wehrmacht became consultants and instructors in this industrial revival. They had lived through both worlds, and they understood why the American system had triumphed. One such man, interviewed by an automotive trade journal in 1967, summed it up with brutal honesty. "The GMC truck taught us that in modern war, perfection is the enemy of good enough," he said. Germany built beautiful vehicles, but they were too complicated to build in large numbers, too delicate to maintain in the mud and snow. He pointed to a photo of a fully restored GMC CCKW in a museum. American-built trucks that could be made by the millions and fixed by anyone, and that's what won them the war. The magazine article included two side-by-side images. On the left, a fully restored GMC CCKW 2.5-ton cargo truck. The caption read, "American GMC CCKW, over 560,000 produced between 1941 and 1945. Backbone of the Red Ball Express, symbol of American industrial warfare." On the right, an Opel Blitz, elegant and refined. German Opel Blitz, 3-ton truck, approximately 100,000 produced between 1937 and 1944, backbone of German logistics and its limitations. The visual contrast said everything. One truck was a masterpiece. The other won the war. Frankfurt, 1953. A nation rebuilt on lessons learned. The design of the German-built Opel Blitz was exceptional. No one ever doubted that. It was precise, well-balanced, and performed with the kind of crisp efficiency engineers took pride in. But behind that excellence hid a harsh truth. Most models lacked four-wheel drive, and Germany's production capacity simply could not meet the demands of a global war. When placed side by side, the contrast was impossible to ignore. Both trucks, the German Opel and the American GMC, had been built by smart people, but one of them had rolled off the line in hundreds of thousands, packed with interchangeable parts, requiring minimal maintenance, and supported by a logistics network so vast it could supply entire armies indefinitely. The other was crafted with care, but delivered in quantities too small by a production base incapable of matching America's industrial juggernaut. When Whale, Briggs, and the others first inspected that captured GMC truck back in August of 1951, they knew immediately what they were looking at. It wasn't just a vehicle. It was a warning, a glimpse into the future held and what Germany had left behind. What the Americans brought to the battlefield wasn't simply hardware. It was an industrial mindset, shaped on the factory floors of Detroit, refined by decades of building machines for the masses. And when war came, that mindset proved more powerful than any blueprint. The GMC CCKW was never just a truck. It was a lesson in mass production, in design simplicity, and in the cruel math of modern warfare, where quantity often is a form of quality. For the German mechanics who had once repaired these machines as prisoners of war and later as civilians helping rebuild their broken country, those lessons were permanent. They influenced how Germany built things for generations to come. This was more than just the story of a truck. It was the story of a realization. These men had spent their youth believing in a particular kind of superiority, one built on precision, elegance, and perfection. Their vehicles had embodied that belief, but it took the rugged, reliable, mass-produced trucks of their former enemies to show them that efficiency, simplicity, and numbers were what truly won wars. The Americans had taught them that the world didn't need more perfection, it needed things that worked, could be built fast, and fixed easily. That hard-earned wisdom became invaluable in the post-war years, helping transform Germany from a defeated nation into a thriving industrial ally, a recovery powered in no small part by the very machines that had once driven across Europe under the American flag. The men who had once driven and serviced captured GMCs now admitted openly that they had never encountered anything like them. Not because the trucks were superior pieces of engineering, but because the philosophy behind them was one Germany had never embraced. It was not just the truck, Whale would later say, it was the idea of the truck. That honesty, raw, humble, and free of pride, became the foundation for a new kind of wisdom, a wisdom that helped lay the groundwork for an economic miracle, one built not on dominance, but on lessons learned the hard way, and on the back of thousands of American trucks that had once driven across Europe under the American flag. In the end, the GMC CCKW was more than a tool of war. It was a symbol of how industrial vision, shared across an entire nation, can become a weapon more powerful than any cannon, of how understanding what to build and how many to build them is sometimes more important than how brilliantly you build it. And, perhaps most of all, it was a symbol of the moment when a generation of German mechanics stopped looking backward and started rebuilding.